Hello, everybody. This is Ben Hansen from MinnMax. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. And this is 2020's Developer Roundtable discussion. We gathered together 5 great indie developers to talk about developing games this year, the struggles, the challenges, the successes, what it's like, how it's changed the industry in general, new consoles, everything like that. So for this discussion, we have Laura McGee, who's the director, designer for If Found from Dreamfeel. If Found is a visual novel published by Annapurna this year. You should definitely check it out. Nicholas Guerin, who's the creative director on Spiritfarer from Thunder Lotus Games. He was at EA for a while working on games like SSX Blur and Skate It, and then was at Ubisoft for a while working on Assassin's Creed. Brenda Romero, who's the game director on Empire of Sin from Romero Games. You know, she's worked on Wizardry, Ghost Recon. She's been in the industry since 1981. And we're also joined by Matt Nava, who's the creative director on The Pathless, which is the new game from Giant Squid, the studio that he also co-founded. And before that, Matt Nava was the art director on games like Flower and Journey from that game company. And Greg Kasavin, who's the creative director on Hades from Supergiant. Greg was editor-in-chief at GameSpot, then he was a producer on the Command & Conquer series for Red Alert 3, worked on Spec Ops The Line, obviously Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, all of Supergiant's great games. So it's a fun discussion. We hope you enjoy it. If you want to unlock the podcast version of this discussion and support MinnMax in general and discussions like this in the future, you can support MinnMax on Patreon at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. There's a ton of benefits for supporting us, including, again, the podcast version of this discussion. Without further ado, here's a bunch of developers.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, honor to have you. It's nice to get developers together. Has this year felt different, not having folks get together? Like, Matt, has it felt significantly different not being able to get together for GDC and stuff?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I always look forward to going up there and hearing everybody talk and just getting to see everybody. But obviously, 2020 has been the year of Zoom calls, and it's been very disconnected. So it's interesting because I think video games have kind of been the glue that's held us together in a lot of ways. There's a lot of weight on the developers community's shoulders, I think. It's kind of new.
What do you think, like Laura, what do you think the community is missing by not having these events for developers to get together and share ideas and share stories?
I mean, even for the developers ourselves, like, you know, like I definitely miss not having a big release party or anything this year. You know, It's been like, okay, we played Jackbox games and we Skyped together. But yeah, no, I think it's very different this year, you know, and it's like, I think we're all just happy to get through it and be at the other side. And I definitely count myself lucky to be, you know, sat at home making video games. You know, it's like, it's been great being able to move to remote, and it hasn't been too different. But yeah, definitely missing a lot of meeting up with other developers. But I guess that's what this is. It's kind of like, you know, it reminds me of the Hollywood Reporter or something, does like the end of the year, like gets like directors and writers together. So like that's kind of like this, which is cool. Yeah, yeah. So you said working remote, you're in Ireland, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And Brenda, you're also in Ireland?
I am, yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Do you two know each other?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Small scene
had,
over there?
The Irish Game Awards recently, and if it wasn't for like COVID, we probably would have met up and everything.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But, we're in 2 different sides of the country. The very small country. 2 different sides of a very small country. It's like 2 hours away.
How tight is the community over there?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I'd say everybody knows everybody. And it's having been in Silicon Valley as well, I think there's a real sense in Ireland of the rising tide will raise all ships. So there's people work together really closely here. And it's not a case of, well, if Laura does well, that means I'm not going to do well. It's if she does well, great, good. Glad to hear it, you know? So yeah, it's fantastic community. It's the reason I moved here.
Yeah. If you are that person, by the way, let us know in the comments. If you only had so much money to spend, you're like, If Found or Empire of Sin, what do I go for? That's a very specific decision. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned like the Game Awards. How was that for you, Greg, doing the strange remote Game Awards experience?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was similar to this, right? Sitting, looking into a camera, and being prepared potentially to speak or perhaps not. Having been, it's amazing that the show came together like at all, much less the way it did. I mean, I think as a production, it, Jeff Keighley kind of makes it look easy or something like that. Like I think watching the show, you would never believe that he is the person who's kind of like organizing the entire thing. You watch it, he's like a very skilled host, right? He just kind of flows through the whole event, but he's putting the whole thing together too with a huge team, and it's remarkable that it happened under these circumstances, and it was a really exciting event. Like, you could tell if you're on social media at all, it's like it does feel like everybody's kind of talking about it, and so it's nice to have something like that where, again, for lack of that connection this year, it's something that people can all kind of participate in together and talk about and so on. And for us, I mean, kind of similar to what we talked about before, it would be nice to get to celebrate some of these things in person. But it's great that there's like any kind of substitute or counterpart. And I think for most people watching in the audience, it's almost kind of no different from years past. It
wasn't as drastic as I thought it would be. Yeah, I mean, you talk about shipping a game and not being able to celebrate. I also think about just the amount of kind of folks leaving or changing studios this year as well. Like, it's got to be so bizarre to leave your team and not have a goodbye celebration. Just to be like, well, we'll see you some other time in the future, hopefully. It's so strange. But let's see. Nick, I'm curious. Was there like a green room for the Game Awards, or what was that like for you?
It was weird because you expected to be in a room and you were, but then again, some of the nominations, some of the awards were offline, some other were online. We had people had to be live there to make a speech if it was happening, and then I was just like anxiously waiting on my screen. I guess you were all doing this, and you were like, "Is it going to happen?" And then you see some celebrity, some Hollywood celebrity. We're doing it for Game for Impact with eFound, and then you have Gal Gadot being there. It's like, oh wow, that's Gal Gadot. And then she reads something, and then you have boo. That's okay. So, and then that's it.
And then you go back to your quiet house.
There's nothing else. There's no celebration, no party, no champagne drinking, so you can be like in a tux and still having pajama underwear, and that's it. And then you go back to what you were doing.
Was there like an online party? Because I know like a few like conference-y kind of events had like little digital characters for after the show. You could walk around. I don't think there was anything like that for the Game Awards.
Oh, that's so weird. There's a digital Gal Gadot walking around you can interact with. That's too bizarre.
Still pixely one. I mean, in some ways it's nice though, because like, being in Ireland, it's like, it's such a hassle to go to San Francisco or to LA. So it is kind of nice being able to do all the things. Yeah. And Brenda, you don't fly either, right? You'd have to take the boat to go to them.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that, not that I would ever want a pandemic to have this upside, but it's one of the things that has been nice is that a lot of events that are always just in person are suddenly online. And so I do find myself attending more things that I normally would have, and speaking places that I normally wouldn't, because exactly like you say, I won't fly.
Wow. Matt, just in general, like, what has 2020 taught you about game development that you didn't know before? Working conditions, I mean, it's a big topic, but how has it changed your perspective on the industry and just what's capable here?
Yeah, it's, I think it's really highlighted the necessity to connect with your team and to have a close working relationship with everybody. And what I didn't realize was that the transition to remote for us was actually not too big of a transition. There wasn't as drastic a change as I thought it was going to be, because we had already been using remote tools, basically like Slack and video conferencing. And we had, like, just before the pandemic, we bought everybody headsets and stuff because we brought in a couple of remote workers. And then we realized that, like, hey, now we can just do this all the time. And there's been these kind of trade-offs, like Brenda was saying, there's actually some upsides to it as well that were unexpected, Like when we were shipping the Pathless, we had so many crazy things happening. We had to hit the launch date of the PS5, which was unknown. And Sony's tech wasn't online, and it was just nobody knew what was going on. But we had to make like these split-second decisions. And if I had to drive across LA to go to the office and back, it would have never happened. It was like, no, everybody is online right now, so we can talk and do this right now at Sony, everywhere. So in many ways, like, we were saved by it, in other ways, it was very difficult. So that was a surprise.
That's so bizarre to think about the duality of it. Taught us the importance of, being a team and working tightly together, but also like it actually wasn't as hard as we thought. Is everybody kind of in that boat that working remotely was a little bit easier than expected?
I don't know.
It was easier. Yeah. Easier than we expected anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll go back to like being full-time in an office. Like, it's nice. You definitely miss like the socialness, especially with the people you don't work directly with. And but I think there's like a balance. Like if we're going to move back, we're probably going to be like remote most of the time and then get together like once a week or once every 2 weeks to go over things. But yeah, definitely it's like changed a lot, and remote work has worked out really well. Especially like, we're in this situation where like we share our desktops with each other. So we're like working on the exact same thing. We're not trying to like describe it over voice or anything,
Right.
We can share video and we can share screens. So it's been pretty easy.
Yeah. And Greg, I think of, your team with an office in San Francisco. Has it changed your perspective on how you should structure this thing?
I mean, I had a pretty, I related a lot to what Matt described, where for us, the transition really was not that difficult, at least from a work standpoint, right? Like I think this year affected everybody differently, just kind of on a personal level. And depending on people's like where they were living, if they had roommates or something like that, I think your day-to-day was really, really different circumstantially. But from a work standpoint, we had already been remote working at least part of the time and had some fully remote employees. So that transition wasn't that hard for us. And I think probably everyone on this call, like we probably benefit from being just smaller. Like I think about the, kind of the mega companies and publishers of like an Electronic Arts or something. If you work on a team with like hundreds or 1,000 people in some cases, it's like, that seems like it would be a lot harder to pull off. But if you're like a close-knit group of, a relative handful of people and you're used to kind of being on Zoom calls anyway, it's not that big of a deal. Again, just in terms of having to work remotely. So right. I was already like I've been working from this particular space, ever since our Bastion days. So I'm no stranger to having to work right in front of this desk. I just got to do it more. And it was strange to kind of reconcile some of the upsides of the circumstances, because you're like, I think as Brenda said, like you wouldn't trade it off. Like you wouldn't wish for a global pandemic under any circumstances. Right. It was strange to find the silver lining of like, I get to see my family more, things like that. Like I don't have much of a social life to really give up. So like, no big deal. I just kind of go on walks anyway. That's not a very empathetic response, but it's one of those things where you weigh. I had to try to look on the bright side of it. I think just because it's the only way to keep from despairing too much about it. So I'm glad that there was some at all, and that our team was able to keep working. Yeah.
We were fortunate, unbelievably fortunate, in that where our office is located is in Galway in Ireland. And Galway it's a medieval town. It's small, and we were fiercely devoted to staying in the city center. So we were maybe 2 weeks away from signing a lease on a new, much larger place in city center, because people wanted to all work together. And so that's obviously changed. I mean, thank goodness we didn't sign that lease, right? So now we know that we will have a combination of remote worker, people who want to work from home, and people who do want to be in the office. This past weekend, we had, this would only probably happen in our office, but there was a socially distanced death match. Bearing in mind John and a guy that he played with every Thursday night, who's the lead programmer on my project. And so he came in, and they were socially distanced, and they played for 9 hours, first time this year, since everybody shut down. But it was so nice, just like how much, because we're a tight knit team, and just how much I missed seeing him there, so there's nothing to me that will there's zero chance that I want to go full Zoom. I really, I miss that. And maybe I think I also really miss when I lived in Silicon Valley, there wasn't the same connectivity, the same connections, but the Irish game scene anyway tends to meet regularly, like for next to no reason even. And so it's very social community. And so I've really, really missed that. And I look forward to that starting again.
Yeah, it's wild to see companies like Square Enix in particular say like, hey, everybody can work from home moving into the future. I never thought that of all the big publishers, Square Enix would be the first one to really message that. And I always think back to, I heard the story about how Eric Wolpott, Valve, was arguing jokingly, half jokingly, I'm sure. He's from Minnesota originally, and he was arguing like Valve should move its headquarters to Duluth, Minnesota, because we could all live like kings in Duluth. Just imagine how sweet that would be. And I wonder if there is going to be a little bit of, an exodus from the cities now that people realize like you don't need to spend all that money on rent or housing there when you could just go live in Minnesota, for example. We like it here, but Nick, do you think it's going to shake up game development moving into the future here?
Most probably. I know that we've changed our mind on it. We were, specifically Will, our CEO, was more adamant in having everyone at the office all the time. And many of us were like, we can still do it from home. And then shipping the game was, I was going to say something that was way easier than we anticipated. But I don't know for you guys, but it feels like, and I don't mean to pry anything from you, but after having shipped a game, you try to think of what's next. To us, what's next is another project. And then that's where you see the difference, because it felt to us again that shipping the game was perfectly fine. Everyone knew what they had to do, where everyone was on track-ish. I mean, you knew how to organize yourselves. But then you go into more of a creative chaos where then you feel like some of the things should happen on between the coffee machine and then the bathroom, and then that thing is lost. Everything you have is Zoom meetings and everything is formatted, so you feel like at work all the time, whereas I don't know if you feel that pressure that much for creating something new.
I absolutely do, because that's where I'm at. And like right now, there's one thing I didn't do, so let me just do it right now. You've probably noticed me looking. And so right now I've learned on my 3 monitors, I just made those the desktop. So now I'm not distracted and I just have the 2 of you and I don't have Slack firing off over here. But I absolutely feel that like the new project, it's for some reason, there is that sense of let's all get in a room. So I'll tell you what ridiculous thing I'm doing. This is so ridiculous. There's 4 of us. And I'm renting the biggest ballroom in Galway so we can do a socially distanced design meeting. It's ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
It's ridiculous. And especially the hotel that it's at, there's this big chandelier. So we just have to wait till we're at the right level of restrictions. But this is what we're doing. And it's because we all felt we tried to do it, something like this, and it just didn't have that. Let's sit back, think with, there's something missing. And maybe there's not anything missing, but it feels like there is.
I think it's like you suggested that there's this kind of level of discussion that's more off the cuff, by the coffee machine or something like that. I think about that all the time. I know for like even beyond the just the social benefits of getting to like just kind of hang out and chat with your colleagues. Like I know for a fact I could trace a bunch of the kind of good, often really high level like creative decisions that we've made on our games, like from those kind of moments. They didn't happen in like structured meetings, that were scheduled or whatever, where we all showed up. They happened randomly, on a walk, to get a cup of coffee or something like that, or just hanging out after hours, or just like turning to my right and talking to the person next to me or something like that. So I wonder how to, I think, Brenda, I think it's a great idea just to try to pull everyone together in some capacity like that. But I don't know what will work for us to sort of recapture that specific thing, other than we do try to just like be a little bit more informal with Slack stuff, try to like recapture some of the spontaneity of like, hey, can you talk right now? Like, are you around? Can we just like, I have an idea. I want to talk about it. And just as long as there's openness for something like that, it gets some of it back at least, but maybe not all.
Yeah. There's so much of the what happens in a game and in game design comes from a group of people talking and somebody else overhearing somebody else saying something, and then saying, you know what you could do? You could try this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ideas kind of snowball.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. At the start of the conversation, we all talked about how the first thing we missed was just being with everybody, that connection. And then you have this realization that there's this shifting to remote work and kind of removing that personal connection, that in-person connection is easier than you expected. And then I think the next realization is that you have to be careful to not just accept that, right? And like just let it go. And that's especially moving on to the next project in that early design phase where those impromptu discussions are so important. That figuring out that connection and how to manage that now, like with Brenda's amazing idea of just getting a giant space, I think like that's something that I've been thinking about as well. And I think that what it's going to do is it's going to change the way that remote tools work, because Slack and Zoom calls, they're all based on a phone call where it's like, hey, everybody, turn it on and now we'll talk to each other and then turn it off.
Yeah.
And it's like you're connected for a moment and then you're disconnected. And like, if you look at Discord, which is like a newer paradigm, you've just got like call channels, which are just like, it's always on. You just log in and everybody's hanging out. But I think that the problem with that is that it's going to then be tiring, right? Like nobody's going to want to just be like, hey, the requirement for work is like, you're always online. I mean, that's insane. So yeah, it's a different time, and just figuring that out and how to manage that without tiring people out. I think that's going to be the next trick.
Yeah, there's a physical aspect to it because you feel constrained, that little space you're in, because you the rest of the world's right in front of you. You have to be there for them. You feel like on the end of something. You cannot just walk away and do something else. It feels so much, shackled to your desk in a way,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So lining this call up, it wasn't until yesterday that I realized like, oh, these are all original ideas, all new IP from everybody here. That's happy. I'm happy how it lined up that way, in a year that's largely defined by its remakes. I mean, this is probably the most remake heavy year I think I've ever seen in the game industry. A lot of just huge stuff coming through. Final Fantasy 7, Resident Evil 3, Tony Hawk, Demon Souls, Xenoblade, just remasters, remakes all over the place. Greg, in general, how challenging is it to force new IP into the game industry these days?
I mean, I think as a smaller team, it's no more challenging than anything else. I think like, I think sometimes there's a misconception around like what creative risk is, and people say like, oh, these big publishers, they don't take any risks. It's like, well, it depends on how you look at it, because something like Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I think is a massive risk, right? They spent like years and years on that project, and it's something that's, deeply beloved, and they made significant changes, both to the story and to the gameplay and all this stuff. So I was really impressed with that game. I'm like, dang, I think this is a really scary undertaking just conceptually, and this is about as good as, like, I couldn't have really imagined it. Like, I didn't want them to just kind of reskin the old game. I didn't think it would have held up. But with smaller teams, it's like you have to take some kind of risk as well, because we ask ourselves, it's like, why should our game exist? Like, why make, if we're making something in an existing genre, why is it not just an inferior version of some game that's already out there? Like, what are we adding that has the potential to make it so that someone plays this game and goes like, I'm glad I played this. I appreciate that this was part of my life. So we look for that quality, and that often just leads us to trying to make new ideas altogether. And with something like Hades, it's the first time we've been really fortunate to have been able to make like original IP multiple times in the past. So for the first time, we set out to like adapt an existing mythology rather than just totally make stuff up.
Yeah.
And that to us was like kind of paradoxically a bigger, scarier creative challenge than just, because we know what it's like to just make stuff up, and we love doing it, but we're like, let's try something different, partly just for the sake of it, and partly because we were really, we identified we had a particular point of view on Greek myth that we felt hadn't really been explored that much before in modern media. And that was one of those things. It's like, there's a lot of stuff based on Greek myth, right? So we had to really ask ourselves, like, why do it? What are we bringing here?
Yeah, and it's weird, you can start to see patterns in the chaos, but I was thinking about this year and just what's unifying a lot of the big themes from games, and it seems like it's a very death and mythology focused year for releases. I mean, you can go to films with Pixar's Soul and stuff, but even in games, Hades, Spiritfarer, obviously, Immortals, Phoenix Rising, Greg, that must be bizarre to see that game, like Sakuna, Rise and Ruin, Neo 2, Valhalla. I'm thinking about your game in particular, Nick. I guess you and Greg shared a character, at least one, with Karen, how do you pronounce that? I forget.
Karen, the hard C.
Yeah.
Karen.
I had one day a Bulgarian journalist that told me it's Haron with a tension.
Closer to the Greek, I think.
But it's funny you mentioned this because one of the first games I played after we shipped Spiritfarer was Hades, because I was holding that to it before the game was out of early access. Sorry, I mean, early access to me is cool, but I feel like I'm working again, so I try to stay away from it. And many of the topics of the Greek mythology were there, and I felt lucky when I played Hades because I was lucky to play Hades because it's an awesome game in itself. But it's just that many of the characters we had in the game, at first they all had Greek myth characters' names. Like you would meet Alacto, you would meet many of the Olympians and all the heroes of the Greek myth, and then we decided to not do this because it felt not right for Spiritfarer, and then I was playing it and wow, it could never have even compared. It was terrible for us to do this.
We're overly saturated. Do you think that's just a strange coincidence? Do you think there's any reason that these kind of mythological games are coming out this year, or any larger themes are bubbling up?
They never go away, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of like Greek myth. It's like maybe it takes a year or two off or something like that, but there's always something. It's it's like there's a reason it's been compelling to people for thousands of years, right? Like something about it remains relevant to people somehow. But yeah, the kind of the different ways to adapt it, whether just choosing like names and likenesses or just going more directly based on it. I think like mythology, Norse mythology, Greek mythology, it's like I'm pretty sure there are games every single year based on those subjects. It's like maybe certain years more that it's not every year you get like a God of War or something like that will like really bring it to the forefront. But it's like as a game developer, it comes with some advantages. Like we think with our games, one of the things we struggle with creating totally new like settings in each of our games is like, well, you got to explain, like the player has to figure everything out. So I think about our second game, Transistor. It's like you're thrown into this science fiction world and you don't know what is going on. You don't know how anything works. And it could be really disorienting from a player standpoint. It could like really feel almost unpleasant just to start to figure everything out. But with Greek myth, it's like when we're making a game like Hades, where it has a pick up and play component, we know that when you encounter Zeus or something like that, or Poseidon, you know what those guys are about. One guy's going to give you lightning powers, one guy's going to give you water powers, and so on. Yeah. I think we go much deeper than that, but superficially at least, it's something that you can kind of hang on to and feel comfortable with. And then we figure, we'll explore it much more beneath that surface, but at least you're kind of comfortable going into it. And so that kind of like onboarding process we find to be really, really tricky when making new stuff.
I think what's really interesting about like those classic myths and those classic stories and what keeps them alive is how they get reinterpreted, and I think like like a Spiritfarer version, or even like a giant squid version would be like so completely different. And I think that going back to the original question, I think that speaks to why, or at least like along the path of why people are interested in the smaller teams rather than the bigger ones, or why we're freer, is because like it's less about the IP and more about the studio themselves and the studio's identity, like we know, like we're excited for the next Super Giant game or the next Giant Squid game, because we want to see what these folks will do next. And it's less about seeing this IP again, so much as seeing that team again. And I think with the smaller teams, it's just more possible for fewer developers to have more of an impact on it, which is really cool,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you get a better sense of the teams themselves, which I think is kind of the advantage of like a slightly smaller team than the really big ones.
Yeah, that's why we got into it way back when. Myself and the two guys, Gavin and Amir, who co-founded Supergiant, I worked with them at Electronic Arts on a team of like over 100 people, which was big at the time. That's not even that big these days. But yeah, it's like we're seeing these games, back then it was, Plants vs. Zombies and World of Goo and Castle Crashers and stuff like that. And they were so good, but seemed also so personal. They had that sense of like, you could just feel the creators' personalities, whether rightly or not. They just felt so specific in a way that kind of bigger games, feel more diffuse or something like that. And that was really exciting. It's like, well, what could we do if we could just make something our way? So yeah, I think you're totally right. It's like one of the inherent pleasures of smaller independent games is that they could just be even more specific and distinct feeling.
And I think if you're working with a pre-existing IP, you'll work into like a pre-existing set of, okay, this is what it has to feel like. Whereas with something like Empire of Sin, you see Brenda's love of like Prohibition and the music and everything, and it has like a really strong identity too, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about like the team as the IP in a strange way. And I just read Sid Meier's memoir, which was just a delight, by the way, just super quick, lovely read. And it makes me think of that idea of just slapping his name on the front, how that becomes the IP to connect all these different thoughts and ideas there. Matt, do you think there's a lot of expectations for the next Giant Squid game? Do you think people like to stick games and developers in a rut now and be like, okay, we know exactly what to expect from the future of Giant Squid?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for us because, I've had that question posed to me after every game I've worked on, after Flower, which was the first game I ever worked on, people are like, okay, what's next? You going to make like another game with flowers? It's gonna be nature or something? And then we're like, no, we're going to make a desert. We're going to take all the flowers out, make Journey. And then after Journey, it was just like, how are you going to top that? Everybody loved it so much, like, what's beyond the mountain for you? That question so many times. And so again, I was like, no, I want to make something that's wet, and then we made Abzu instead of this dry game. We made a wet game. And then, after Abzu, again, the same question, like people started to think, okay, we understand, what this guy's all about, but the Pathless for us was a big kind of step in a new direction. It had a lot of the same kind of atmosphere and tone and feel, but it had more game elements. It's a bigger game, a different structure, and I think that when people play it, what's interesting is we've seen people start playing it and they didn't know that we were the devs, and they can call it out. Like they're like, this reminds me of Journey, and I'm like, you're looking at a forest. Why do you think of a desert? Like, what is going on there? I don't know what it is, but like whatever I touch, it always has something that people recognize. And so, I mean, I can't avoid it. I just have to accept it.
Yeah, it might be something about just like the certain air of mystery or kind of like the understated storytelling presentation, which I think is another thing that binds everybody together. If you really want to zoom out again, about just like everybody had a good use of efficient storytelling this year. No gigantic long monologues from anybody. Like Laura in particular, I mean, your game is nothing but story and storytelling. Do you want to talk about just trying to boil things down to just the core essence of how efficient can I tell this story?
Yeah, so like for us, it was like the story that came first. Like we were experimenting and playing around with these mechanics. We had the zooming mechanic, we had erasing, but where that led us, that was like the seed that we built around. So, okay, we had a diary, we had erasing, and we were like, what's the story that comes out of this? So the obvious thing that was the end of the world. We had this like girl like erasing like the memories and such. But as we wrote the story and developed it, we had like certain scenes that we tried to represent, and part of like finding it was finding how all these bits fit together. But it was the story at the end and the experience the player has. And we could have made it longer. We could have like repeated sections. We could have had an explory section or something, but we just wanted to like focus on the story like straight on and the experience of it. Whether that's like little moments of erasing like certain imagery and everything. So the game ended up actually a little bit longer than we even meant to. It could have been even shorter. But it was, our decisions, which isn't the way that like, all developers go or the way all games should be made. But we very much like, we have this toolbox of ideas and we have this toolbox of mechanics and things. How do we use those for the story benefit? And one of the biggest changes, which is like maybe even, like it wasn't controversial to us as developers, but like I wonder how that like changes people's perception of the game. Is we went from like an exploratory, like being able to go anywhere, to a more like guided experience, and that was something that helped. It helped anyone be able to play it. Like my parents played it, which is kind of wild. They haven't played a game since literally Pong. Like my dad used to get like a sports game every so often, but he could never play it. But somehow he played through it fine multiple times. But we made it towards a more guided experience with less freedom. So, because like our lead artist was just getting lost and everything, and it was about focusing on that the experience of it, but. Maybe, I don't know, maybe some people would have liked it being more explory. So it's interesting. I think every game is its own unique beast, and you kind of just try to find it as you develop it. And at the end, you're like, oh, cool, that's what we made. You end up with something at the end. But yeah, I was really happy with how it came together. But definitely the focus was on the story and really boiling it down, not having, there was like scenes we caught and things that we like left out because they weren't adding to the characters, or they weren't adding to the story. Yeah. And it was about trying to be as efficient as possible. I think we used almost everything, but everything got like completely recontextualized multiple times. So where like the scenes like meant different than when we first developed them. But yeah, everything is there just for the character's sake, essentially. And anything that wasn't adding to that, we didn't have time for, because like we're trying to make a game. We can't just keep adding to it.
Yeah. Is that just the natural arc of all game development, is starting with absolute freedom and exploration and then saying, okay, we need to make this more and more guided? Like, Nick, I think of you in particular working on the Assassin's Creed series for so long. I'd imagine every early pitch for every AC game is, okay, this is the one where it's just wide open. You can do anything. It turns out let's guide it a little bit more and more here.
Yeah. For AC, it's a bit different because usually Ubisoft comes up with the first thing they try to define is place and time. So they basically say that time period and that in that specific corner of the world is awesome, and we should do something around this, which is generally how they start this. And then the game has to take and have the burden of being a sequel. So it's a huge machine. I mean, when Greg talked about EA at 100 people, I think the latest game I shipped was Odyssey, and it's even bigger now. But it's games that are around 1,000 developers.
Oh,
I mean, you have
God.
like 5-6 studios. It's just humongous. You feel like such a tiny thing within that massive horde of people. So yeah, you feel that there's that that continuation that has to happen, and then everything is more complicated. I think I haven't answered your question at all.
No, that's right. But with Spiritfarer, did you find yourself getting more and more guided like Laura did?
Right. Actually, when we started, there was already that idea about the contrast between the myth of Charon and Studio Ghibli's movies. So Miyazaki was there, and to try to do something with that contrast in mind. And then I reshaped it around the idea of care and passage of the influence of people in our lives and how we were shaped by it. But sorry, I need to do a little segue and go back to what Matt said. Yeah. Because I feel like, as for everything, almost everything in game design, your answer is always in Brenda's work. And that's, what are you talking about? In the sense that the mechanics is the message. Like everything you feel, it's funny that you say that you're still wondering about why people are feeling that connection between your games, but that sense of flow, the way you manipulate the character, the 3Cs, so the way you manipulate the camera as well. It's all there all the time. You feel that. And you feel like this is what is at the core of it. Same for E-Found. When I played E-Found, I felt humbled because it was that kind of complete art liberty to it. I mean, you definitely people at Dreamfield and Laura there. I'm talking for you. So you can then again say something else, but it felt to me like you could do something that really meant something, and the simple, very simple mechanic of erasing your past is exactly what it means. You just do that and you have it. Of course, it's way more complicated, but in essence, that's what you have. So that's where you finding those elements of what makes the game say something by how you play it is actually, you feel like I don't know for you guys, but you feel like a defining moment in your the progression of the game. Same for Hades. I mean, the reason why it's a roguelike, because you are the son of the god of the dead. I mean, of course, it makes sense. It's completely normal, and that's what makes the game being a better roguelike, because then it gives the whole roguelike idea to a whole new level. So for Spiritfarer, the same thing. It felt to us that very simply, you just have a hug button, and that's what you do, and that's all there is to it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it's effective. Turns out that's what people wanted in 2020 was a hug button. Every game could use a hug button, I believe. Empire's Sin needs to have some strategy of hugging. I don't know exactly how that ties in, but it's in there, I'm sure.
Solve gang wars.
Well, no, there are brothels.
Oh, that's true. Brothels. That's true. Yeah, the ultimate hug.
Yeah, it's the ultimate hug, yeah.
Brenda, it'd be a shame not to ask you, with your amazing view of the industry, what you think about the new generation. Do you have any thoughts on the new consoles? And I'm sure how much you've gotten to poke around yet, but
I am so soon off of release. The nice thing, I think, probably starting like the end of this week, I go into my end of year game playing festival.
Ooh.
This is the first generation. Like I posted on Facebook my kingdom for a PS5. I mean, I have dev kits, right? But because I wasn't able to get a PS5. You know, I wasn't able to get a PS5. I wasn't able to get a new Xbox Series X. Like the whole time that people were pre-ordering, I was shipping. And so I find myself as desperate as everybody. But I did that post, and a developer friend accidentally ordered 2. So apparently I have a PS5 on the way.
There we go. Nice.
But I'm really looking forward to, at the end of every year, John and I clear our schedule and we do nothing but play games. I mean, it's a full-time job. We get up in the morning and it's our form of Christmas. So I'm super excited for it. And I'm, the next games that we develop, I'm excited. I can't talk too much about that, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm always excited about the new generation of consoles, because it means, it's a new platform that has new possibilities, right? And that's always very intriguing. Especially we're at the early stage, right? So we're not really seeing stuff being pushed to the edge where we are. Everybody's pushed the PS4 about as far as it can go, and the Xbox about as far as it can go. But yeah, I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to receiving it, for one.
Yes.
And then once I get it set up, I'm looking forward to playing games, and then coming back in the new year making games.
Yeah. Well, I guess the only person that it's been announced that they're working on the new generation, I guess, is Matt. But what's your experience, behind or under the hood on a PlayStation 5?
Oh man, it was wild, we were one of the first games to go through cert on the new PlayStation 5 hardware, and I think the only one that got it through before us was Demon Souls. But, those guys are crazy. But no, it was crazy because Sony didn't really have everything together yet. I've never done a launch title for a new platform, but apparently this is how it goes. No one knows what they're doing on either side, and so you're trying to submit the build to their hardware tech, and they don't have it. And so we were in communication with Sony on this stuff, and we were a guinea pig for them. They were figuring out stuff with us that benefited the next game that went through, so that was satisfying. And then it was hard to get the hardware even for us, right? I never got a PS5. But I got the controller, and they didn't have the drivers to,
of course,
do dev work with the controller yet on a PC. So we had to write it ourselves. And so, I tuned they have the new rumble on the triggers and all that stuff. I was able to tune that. And as I was doing it, my first thought was like, this is weird. I didn't get it. And, it took me a while to figure out what it could do and what it could bring to the game. And then after I was, played the game with it for a while, I went back to working on the PlayStation 4, and then I realized, oh, something's missing. This should have been here the whole time. And now I had that thought, like, I was like, oh, we're at the beginning of this. Like Brenda was saying, this is going to go a long way. People are going to figure out new, interesting things to do with this. So that was a cool thought to have. But yeah, it was definitely a trick. And the nice thing though about it was that this generation of hardware really feels like a big step in power forward. Like it was just like night and day. Like it runs fantastic on there. Like getting it up and running on the hardware was simple, like technically, to get it running nice. And so I think that's going to really, like, it's going to make the high end experiences really cool. But it's all like, the part about that it excites me is that it's going to enable smaller devs who don't have the resources to optimize their games infinitely and like make things really tight. Like those experiences are just going to be easier to make and better. And so that was the other thing that excited me. It was just like, small games like us, they're just going to be a higher quality.
Yeah. I mean, Greg, your team got Hades to run amazingly well on the Switch. So I imagine you know a lot about how much work it takes to optimize things there.
Yeah, it took a lot for sure. And it was something that we had planned pretty much from the start. So even still, like basically developing the whole game, knowing that we may well eventually bring it to the Switch, and kind of like, even from a design standpoint, it's an influence of like, you can't, think about how many total like characters or creatures could be present in a given scene, because there are hardware restrictions that can limit that. Even though on PC you could cram as much as you want in there and it probably runs fine. But if you have any hope of coming to consoles, it may be a different story, and you don't want to go back and like redesign your whole game just to get it running on a console. You may as well account for that from the start. So even on top of that, yeah, it was a big like engineering undertaking. The other thing is we have our own tech that we've been using. Like I think we've been around long enough to where the idea of like having your own engine was less quaint at the time that we started, and we've been kind of investing in and improving our tech ever since. But one of the things that it doesn't do as well, it's really good at making the games that we want to make and the tools that work well for the people we have on team. But bringing our tech to different platforms is a big challenge. So we did a lot of work to make it kind of more efficient and more performant. And but yeah, that's all. I'm not an engineer. It's all
sure
sorcery to me. I just know that we had a lot of very smart engineers like banging their heads against these problems for a really long time, just so we can get it running as well as it did on the Switch. It was something that was really important to us. It's the sort of game that like the performance and smoothness of it really matter. I mean, I think different players have different perceptions of like whether hitting that 60 frames per second is like important or not. But I've always been like a frame rate sensitive kind of player myself. Once you play, whatever Virtua Fighter 2 or something like that, like once you've experienced a really smooth game, I think there's kind of, then you notice when you're playing something that's not that way. And so we've always prioritized it highly. Yeah. The Switch is an amazing, it's like, so I think it was kind of a lifesaver for a lot of people this year, especially. But yeah, with like the small form factor, it's not going to be as powerful as a PS5. Of course, yeah.
Nick, just creatively, do you feel like the new generation kind of invigorates the team?
This, and it also scares the team, of course.
Of course, it just means this is going to cost more money moving into the future.
Well, I know that we made some gambles for Spiritfarer. We decided to ship on everything, which was seemed like a very good idea at times, but when you're closing to shipping it, you kind of regret it. Because it's, of course, your game's going to have potential of having a huge market, but then you are stuck with 10,000 different SKUs, and it's terrible for a team of 13 people and two dev testers. It's tough. So you have to make sure everything's and then you compromise. You have to, when you ship something, it's so tough to ship a game that that you have to do some kind of sacrifices. For the Switch, we decided to ship at 30 frames a second, which we're all very unhappy with, but then again, we didn't have really other choice. And we use Unity, so it's simpler in that regard. Just imagining what Greg said was like, it gave me like cold sweat, like damn, having your own system to deal with this. But no, at least Unity does something good, and in the sense that you can. But we know with all the new type of platforms like Stadia, and we had also like our share of problems with Game Pass on PC. And of course, we apologize to all gamers for this because we're small and we try to do our best. But it's having that many platforms is complicated. So the next gen is, we hope, as Matt said, is gonna make some shortcuts for us. And tech-wise, we're not that tech-heavy. I mean, everything we do is hand-drawn 2D, so scale up the resolution and then more frames. But beyond that, it's for us, it feels more like what's the next type of market is going to be more than the actual tech.
Right. Well, hey, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it depends on the type of game as well. Like, definitely with something like Hades, it's action. You want that, like, tight controls, like, tight camera and everything. But Spiritfarer is a bit chiller, So I think 30 frames per second is totally grand. And, like, for me, like, the consoles and everything, they're like other platforms. It's fine, and it's exciting when there's, like, the adaptive, like, triggers and it's like a new piece of tech. But at the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, like, so many of my favorite games this year are like web games, like made in like tools like Bitsy, where you control little pixely characters walking around, or just like very simplistic games that don't need these massive computers. And almost more than a new console, I get excited when there's a new game making tool, because like it's almost like a genre in its own right, and to see what people come up with. So I think, there's this whole like spread of games that like, it is cool when there's a new console, but like, I know for me, something like Bitsy over the last few years feels like a fresher, more exciting, like new kind of game, even though like they could probably run on like your Nokia or something than necessarily the PlayStation 5 or Xbox X.
Yeah, Series X. Always still confusing. Yeah, I'd imagine Dreams is very much up your alley then, just for a weird game.
Yeah, Dreams is class. That is so cool, And it's just, and that's something that as well, like you're seeing people make, you're seeing people make games, but also seeing people make more like just interactive theater, or even like different kinds of culture that like little like pieces of like puppet theater that they put on YouTube, and they have their whole channel of that. So I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I'm really excited about. And obviously with the new PS5, people can do more in Dreams, and that's cool.
Right.
I'm less excited to see like Metal Gear Solid 2 in Dreams than someone just making some wacky puppets in Dreams.
Yeah, especially like the good autobiographical stuff that's popping up in Dreams. Like, okay, more of this in games, please, which, is a theme that's getting more and more represented. I should open the floor. Does anybody have any other thoughts on each other's games? Anything they want to ask each other about each other's past or current project? Everybody jump in at once, please.
I just think it's cool that like all of us are like starting on new games right now. None of us are going to talk about it, but that's really exciting. Yeah. And it's just
congratulations,
congrats to all of us. It's nice to get to, I think, so if COVID was good for releasing games, like at least we are, starting on new ones, which is cool.
Yeah, that is. I don't think I've ever been in a situation with everybody just shipped, everybody looking to the next thing. I mean, Empire of Sin has a good long ways ahead of it, so I'll still be doing this for quite a bit. But it's an interesting situation. It's funny, one of you mentioned like a launch party. I think everybody did, and we ended up there's a I even say a mentalist. So we did this Zoom, sort of like a Zoom theater, where we had a bunch of different congrats videos from people. I knew like people on the team, people that they really admired. So asked them if they do a congrats video, and then we had live music. Well, they were live somewhere, just not in the room. But it ended up really feeling like a celebration. And then we sent out these giant black boxes full of like all the things that we would have done, and coupons so that people could order food into their house, and we had t-shirts for the family, and the whole thing was family friendly. So it did feel like a celebration. I feel like we did the best we could do given the circumstance. Everybody seemed to enjoy it, and we're gonna at some point in time we'll all get back together and have one for real. But that was a bit of a challenge, because we sort of all know what a launch party is.
Right.
But the last thing we needed as a small company in a pandemic coming to the, listen to me whine about having a launch party, right? Jesus. But you know, so there was at some point in time, maybe in September, that I was like, what are we gonna do for a launch party? Right. And it was just this, and there was nobody that I could ask either, right? Because like nobody else had done one. So so we put it together, and I ended up pretty happy with how it turned out.
Oh, good. Yeah, with everybody starting a new project, does anybody want to get away from this mission of new IP? Anybody want to pitch a sequel to each other's games? Anybody want to work on anything here? I mean, now's the time to really swap IP if you're into it.
We could make a gangster game in hell. I feel like John has got qualifications for that. You know, we could go to Hades.
Oh, that's excellent.
Gangster like the game in hell is a fun idea. They all killed each other in real life, and now they're stuck.
Yeah, good. You can take it. Go ahead. It's yours.
Yeah.
There you go. Finally,
like
a new idea.
Of people being stuck and having to like work through their problems without being able to kill each other. They gotta talk through it. Sorry. So we've been working on that for 2 games straight now.
They're in hell, but remotely. They have to be somewhere else.
Right. That's right. Yeah. It's no one touching in hell. Very clear. Cool. Anything else anybody else wants to say?
It's just good to see everybody.
Yeah.
To see game developers that I normally would have seen somewhere. And I'd probably see Laura several times a year at one thing or another. And I don't think I've seen you since, well, whenever. Probably last year even. Yeah, we're a whole 2 hours apart.
That's so wild.
2 hours and 6 feet.
Yeah.
Well, hey, plugs. Nick, if people want to check out your game or learn more about the studio, where should they go?
Any platform, PS4, Switch, PC. Spiritfarer is available everywhere. So
perfect. There we go. Matt?
Yeah, so Pathless is out on PS5. It's out on your Apple Arcade on the iPhone. It's on everything, so PS4 as well. So yeah, check it out.
Perfect. Greg?
You could get Hades it's on Nintendo Switch, on Steam, and the Epic Game Store. And thanks. We really appreciate everyone's support on the game, and especially to our early access players who helped us get it to where it is today. It wouldn't have been the same. Probably wouldn't even exist if not for our early access players. So thank you.
Oh wow, Laura.
So If-Found is on PC, on Steam, on Mac, on iOS, and Switch. I think the Switch version is really cool. It's maybe my favorite. The other thing, because you can like play on the big screen, but then touch the little touch screen at the same time. The other thing I want to shout out, actually, I just reminded of it, is in a few days, or maybe next Monday, we're hoping that we're getting out right now, but we are releasing a little tool for making games, so it'll be cool to see other people make games and stuff. It's a plugin for Unity, but it's for using your webcam for adding like art, and you can add all kinds of effects. It's called the Flat Game Maker, so just Google it, and we're going to run a jam and stuff. But I'm really excited about that, because I'm really excited to see what people make. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, sounds cool. Brenda?
Well, Empire of Sin is on pretty much everything as well. So Steam, PC, Mac, PS4, Xbox, also plays on the next gen, also on Switch. I really felt what Nick said when it's like small team shipping on every platform. Absolutely great idea at the beginning, but boy, at the end, you're like, what? Yes, and likewise, similar to what Greg said, really appreciate all the feedback that we're getting from people, so we're looking forward to adding things to the game and updating as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, congratulations on shipping, everybody. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic games all around. Looking forward to seeing what the teams do next. Thank you so much for joining us for this, and thank you for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.